Good morning and welcome to our budget work session on the base budget this morning. We will start by calling on my fellow board members to establish that we have a quorum. Mr. Saeed.
Hello, everybody. Sammy Saeed, super excited to be here to talk about the budget, one of the most fun things that we do here. So really happy to be here.
Good morning, everyone. Shebra Evans. Good to see everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Brenda Wolf, District 5.
Good morning, buenos dias. Grace Rivera Oven, District 1.
Good morning, Julie Yang, District 3.
Mrs. Modrowski.
Good morning, Rebecca Smondrowski, District 2.
Thank you. So welcome again, and we are very pleased to be here. The base budget is such a large and important part of our big budget, and it's important that we have the time and the opportunity to speak with our public as well in terms of what is comprised of the base budget, opportunity for board members to ask questions as we begin our budget season in the coming months. So with that, I will pass it on to Mr. Hall to get us started.
Thank you, and good morning, board members. We're excited to be here today to talk about the FY24 base budget. So as you all know, last year we, with the support of the Board of Education and the County Council and the entire county government, we received the largest increase that we've ever received at MCPS, $245 million, which enabled us to do a number of exciting things. First and foremost, to reach an agreement with our association partners on a 2-year agreement and the largest increase that we've had certainly in recent time for our teachers, our support staff, our leaders across the district. So that is all very exciting. We were also able to add significant investments in math and literacy supports. We added positions to human resources, which has paid off as we started the year nearly fully staffed this year. We were also able to invest in additional positions for security for our schools and our students, along with now we will be paying for AP, IB exams, along with dual enrollment for any and all students who are able to enroll in those classes. So some very exciting upgrades and improvements for the district and for our students based on the work that we all put in last spring and summer. So no sooner do we finish that budget than we are now preparing the FY25 budget. So we've been talking about the ESSER cliff for a long time, and we're finally here. We all knew this day was coming. We've got well over $100 million in ESSER budgeted this year. We know that we're not going to be able to maintain all of that going into next year, and so there are going to be some hard decisions to make. As we've been working with our community, our budget advisory committee, and others, we really have stressed that this is not going to be a year where we're adding significant additions and significant number of new programs. It really is going to be about what do we need to prioritize maintaining so that we can keep the momentum and continue the progress that we've made over the past year. Another additional budget impact, significant impact this year will be the blueprint as we continue to implement that. Pre-K, along with a number of other initiatives, will add significant costs to the budget. We heard a lot last year as we worked through the budget process about transparency. We heard that from our Board of Education, we heard that from the County Council, and we heard that from the community. And so as we're approaching this budget year, we're really trying to be as transparent as we can be. Obviously we have nothing to hide, and so we want to put the information out there, answer the questions that come up, and make sure that people have the correct context as they're looking at this $3.2 billion budget, which is a significant investment on the part of the residents of Montgomery County. So if we could go to the next slide. So I know there's a lot on this slide, but this kind of is an overview of what we were just talking about for the FY24 budget. So the $245 million increase addressed inflation, employee compensation, accelerators. And then there's a list of some of the accelerators there. The ones highlighted in blue are requirements of the blueprint. Others were priorities of the superintendent and the Board of Education. So again, just excited that we were able to add some significant resources for our students. And I'll pause for just a minute for people to take in all the information that's on this slide. All right, and if we could go to the next slide. So as we talk about transparency, this is the way that we have traditionally shown our budget. So this is broken down by the state reported categories. So this is how we have to build our budget based on COMAR and the state requirements. As you can see, about 75% of the budget goes to the three largest categories: instructional salaries, fixed charges, which is mainly benefits, and then special education. And then the remaining quarter make up things such as materials, food service, transportation, operation of plant. But the vast majority, as we've always talked about, does go to salaries and to our instructional efforts at the school level. And one of the other ones that I'll just point out there is the administration at about 2%. So that is one of the lowest in the state, as we talked about last year, for our central administration. So as we move to the next slide, we've tried to break this down in a more simple way, a much more simple way, as you can see from the slide. And again, just providing a different view of this to hopefully provide some of the transparency that we have been discussing and that people have been requesting. So as you know, 80% of the budget does go directly to schools, and there'll be some more details on the next slide as far as how that 80% is broken down. But that's the money that is at the school, at the school level, in the schools. And then there's about an additional 20% that is the district provided services for things like transportation and others. And again, in a couple of slides, we will break that 20% down into more detail. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so this is the 80% here. So it's about $2.5 billion, or 80% of our $3.2 billion budget. And as you can see again, the vast majority goes to the top four categories. So the first one being our elementary schools. So that would be all of the staffing and the materials that are in our elementary schools, teachers, principals, and then the same thing for middle schools. Obviously, we have more elementary schools. We have smaller class sizes at elementary schools. That's why that is a larger amount. Middle schools and then high schools. Special education services is the fourth one there. So again, that is the teachers, the paraeducators that are working directly with students in our schools every day. Then we've got other district provided services to students. Our EML, Emergent Multilingual Services, the maintenance staff that are in all of our buildings, keeping our facilities clean and safe every day, food service, of course, our early childhood programs, and then the last one being some of the alternative programs, including MVA, the Montgomery Virtual Academy. And so this is the breakdown of the 80% of our budget that makes up this $2.5 billion. And if we go to the next slide, there's another breakdown that shows the remaining 20%, or about $631.5 million. And so I know there's a lot on this slide and it's kind of small, but you can follow along in your packets here. So again, the bar on the left there represents that whole $631 million, or again, 20% of the budget. As we break that down, the largest investment is in our transportation. We here at MCPS provide a very high level of service in our transportation department. Most large districts are not able to provide transportation to a lot of their specialty programs, magnet programs, things like that. And so while we go above and beyond here in Montgomery County, there of course is a cost to that as well. This also would include the purchase of our buses, or leases of our electric buses would be included in here. The next largest one here at about $72 million is academic and other instructional supports for students, followed by maintenance. Then we've got our technology, and I'm not going to read them all to you, but you can kind of see here, it's really not until we get over pretty far to the right here that we start talking about some of the central office departments like human resources, finance, district leadership, et cetera. So this is, as we talk about transparency, just breaking the budget down so people can see how it's allocated in all of these different categories. And I'll take just a second to focus on the other category, because I think I will here, if I have my notes. So the other category includes things that aren't big enough to make up their own category. So it's things like the General Counsel's Office, our Partnerships Division, and some of the other programs that just kind of get lumped together in there because it's not as large of an amount to stand on their own. So I will pause there and turn it over to Mr. Riley.
Good morning, board members. So I'm going to take it from, so that's a good introduction of what we're dealing with for FY24. But as Ms. Silvestri mentioned, we're already looking at FY25. So the starting point for FY25 is all the numbers that Mr. Hull just went through. We have our different chapters and departments and divisions looking at the details of all of those numbers. Next slide, please. And that's what we call our same service budget. So they're looking at it on a line-by-line basis along with their budget specialists to see where we're at this year, where we're at the prior year, all in an effort to come up with a FY25 estimated budget. So these are the components of the budget, and I'll just kind of walk through each of these items. So employee compensation, if you recall in previous years, this is one of the items where we're really not sure because we're in the middle of negotiations. So this year, as Mr. Hull mentioned, the fact that we have 2-year agreements with the associations, we have a pretty good idea of what that number is going to be at $110 million. The next item is enrollment changes, and there's a dollar cost there associated with if there's increases in enrollment, there's going to be increases in teachers. So that just to update you, our official enrollment that we get reimbursed on is our September 30th enrollment, which is we're going through that process right now. But we base our expenditures on our projected enrollment. So we don't want to be falling behind. So even though we're getting reimbursed for September 30th, we want to make sure that we have coverage and we have teacher coverage. So we have the demographer looking at all the things that can happen in enrollment in this period. So that we're working through right now. But to give you an idea, right now, our Synergy enrollment, what's in the system is pretty flat. There might be a slight increase there, but you see that number 25 million. So what that also includes is our special education services increase, which we're going through that right now, and that's based on IEPs. That's based on a number of factors, as well as our EML population is also growing too, which means the need for additional teachers there. So that 25 million, we had projected that when we did the budget in June. That number is still staying steady at around that amount. Inflationary costs, when we had this discussion in June, we were at about $10 million. But as we're going through the same service budget with the different departments and divisions, just to let you know, we're about halfway through the 10 chapters. We've gone through about 4 or 5. We're seeing that as increases. We're seeing minimum increases of 3 to 5% in inflation. And when I say inflation, that also includes our rate adjustments too. So any contractual services, we have a good picture of what the next year's amounts are going to be based on contracts. So that, as I mentioned, that went from 10 million to 15 million at this point. And as Mr. Hall mentioned, the two big items that we're facing this year is going to be our blueprint requirements as well as our ESSER cliff. We had spoke that we weren't going to have much of an ESSER cliff, but if you recall, when we balanced our budget last year, we actually did move 29.2 or almost $30 million of operating funds into ESSER with the intention of bringing them back. So that's what 30 out of that 40 represent. We also had $10 million in there to be discussed of other items that are currently in ESSER that were in there prior to moving to 30 that we would during these discussions, consider bringing back. The last item is salary savings from lapse and turnover, and that we're projecting about 55 million. So when you add all them up, it comes up to estimated increase at this point of $160 million. Now that does not include any reductions or accelerators. As I mentioned, the same service budget also includes having our departments and divisions looking at reductions, and we had a 3% target reduction this year that we're working with, and then accelerators we didn't want to say, as Mr. Hull mentioned, we might not have the funds to do many accelerators, but we don't want to stop people from putting those accelerators forth, because we base our budget on need, right? We don't necessarily base our budget on, what our current revenues are. We want to meet the needs of our students, so we base it on need. And then we kind of, after we determine that, then we see what the funding is, and then we go through that other process. But just a little on the blueprint numbers there. So when we estimate that $25 million for blueprint, it's a couple of different things. So there's, there are 4 pillars of blueprint. We're looking at pre-K expansion. We're looking at the NBC teachers, career ladder. We're looking at dual enrollment, IB, and we're looking at community schools and compensatory education. So to come up with that estimate, we have to estimate what our new growth is going to be in each of those areas, and then we also have to estimate what we're going to get from the state. So traditionally, our state reimbursement is about 30%. So we take that number, we take our projection numbers, subtract it from what we anticipate we're going to get from state of Maryland, and that difference is $25 million. So that's what you're seeing there on that.
And if I could just add too, because I know there's often a lot of questions about the lapse and turnover. So that is, we run about a 2% vacancy rate at any given time throughout the year. And so that is what that aligns to. So $55 million out of our payroll and benefits, which amount to about $2.8 billion of the budget, is about 2%. And then, of course, as people leave and we hire new people, there's some time that elapses there as well. And so that's what that is, and that's what that represents. It aligns with our vacancy rate. And just to kind of highlight too, as Mr. Riley said, we're only about halfway through the budget process at this point. We've got almost 2 more months before it'll be presented. Last year and in previous years, we have not shown anything like this at this point. But again, in the effort to be transparent, these are very early estimates, and so they will change as we work through the process. But we just wanted to bring this to you all as early as we could in an effort to be transparent.
So thanks, Mr. Hull. So before I go on, any questions on this slide? Because we're going to dig deeper into ESSER, and that'll be the next 3 slides. But if there's no question, can we move to the next slide? So this detail is what I was referring to before. This is what we looked at last year in order to balance. Remember, we had that gap of $81 million. So part of that was this $29 million that we moved from operating to ESSER. And you're seeing exactly what was moved. So there's positions there, psychologists, PCCs, and 504 positions there. And then you see the other items there, all curriculums there, so all necessary items. The reason we chose those items because when you do the amendment to move it to ESSER, you have to make sure that those are all eligible for ESSER, and these are all eligible ESSER items. So that's the $29.3 million. The next slide is what I was referring to before. These are the positions that are that were in ESSER currently that weren't moved as part of that movement before. So these are, when we were saying it's 29 or 30 plus 10, this is what we're looking at. These are the 34 social workers, 6 restorative justice specialists, and 7 ASAs, as well as SenseWare maintenance support. So that makes up that $40 million that you saw in that previous page for ESSER. And then if we want even more detail, the next slide, and I'm glad you guys have handouts because this gets a little tiny there. But what we're looking at here is our ESSER 3. So ESSER 1 and 2 is already fully spent. sorry about that. Yeah, we were trying to get too much into one slide there. But what we're looking at there is you can see the blue and the green, and then budget year 3. If you add them all up, that's $252 million, and that was the total of ESSER 3. ESSERs 1 and 2, as I mentioned, have already been spent fully, and we don't plan on leaving any money on the table here either. So the funds available there as of October 4th were $72 million, but these are the items that would be, and the $29.2 million are all part of these items as well, too. So what this represents is a combination of the previous 2 slides that we just went through. And I know that's kind of small. I don't know if there's any questions on this, if you can read it. Or,
And we can follow up with a file that's big enough to actually read.
So that's our, that what we're looking at there, that's our ESSER cliff, and that's what we got to figure out what we want to put into the operating budget. Yes, Ms.
Yes, just a quick question. So I'm looking at these and I'm just trying to, on my own, identify, and I'm sure you have already done this, but the items that are on the list of things that went from the base budget to ESSER for FY24, the things that are one time. So as we're looking at, which of the things do we need to look very, very intensely at for possible moving to our base budget for FY25, the things that were one time. So we know, for instance, the transportation application, that was once. But are there other things on here that really were, one-time purchases, like an infrastructure thing, or a series of parts that are now in the warehouse, so we don't need to buy them again, that kind of thing?
Yeah, you can see some of them, and they were directly related to ESSER, contract tracing that we had taken off. But SEL curriculum, actually, we had decided that wouldn't come back. But there's other items here that we aren't planning on bringing back.
Summer school would be another one. And so we can identify the ones that are, actually one-time costs, but what we tried to do on the previous two slides was identify the things that, as an administration, we feel are going to be necessary to bring back. And there may be others in addition to that, but that's kind of how we looked at it.
Thanks.
And summer school would be the enhanced summer school.
Yep.
Ms. Yang?
Yes, I need a little bit help reading this chart, not only the font, but actually question. So for example, it has the virtual academy category, right, there. So it says year one, we spend this much, year two, we spend this much, and then it decrease? And yeah, can you just explain how to read this?
Yeah, so with virtual academies, there's a few different costs associated with that. Some of that, if you recall, in year two, we actually absorbed some of that into our operating budget already. So that's why you're seeing that amount go down from the 13 million to the budget year 3.2 million in there. So that's another one that's kind of still in question of what we want to do, to what extent or what additional dollars we want to bring back into the operating budget. Okay. But that's the reason for that decrease.
And I'd also just point out that this is only ESSER 3. So as you look at years 1 and 2 there, FY22 and FY23, we were mainly spending ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 at that time. So that's why it goes from 75 million, 53 million, and jumps up to 123 million. It's because this year we're only spending ESSER 3. So that's the reason that is.
Can you explain the line item stipends, temporary part-time for working, that kind of trailed off?
Working conditions. So that was some of the additional pay that we had for our bus drivers, our class coverage, those types of things during ESSER when there was a lot of absenteeism and we were having a lot of our teachers working, extra time covering additional classes along with paraeducators. Bus drivers were having to double back and triple back, and so that's what that represents.
Ms. Rivera-Evans?
Okay. And then maybe let's go back to, I had a question on the positions that we put, the parent community coordinator positions that and thank you for saying that, because a lot of people were nervous that we were going to eliminate those positions coming up. So, but it's because they were eligible under ESSER to be put under.
Yeah, all these items were eligible under.
So those positions, are they going to be put back in the general operating budget this year?
Yeah, the intention is for that page that you're looking at, other than the one-time items, would be brought back. But I guess it depends on funding. I mean, that is the intention, but just like everything in our operating budget.
Make me nervous now.
Which page are you referring to?
Page 8.
And it's important to note, too, that just because those things are moved to ESSER does not mean that they are first on the list to be cut or reduced. That's just, as Mr. Riley said, something because they were eligible. Everything will be evaluated, not just the things that are on ESSER right now.
Okay. Then going to slide number 9, could you just for the folks at home, under Senseware maintenance support, what does that mean? Because there's no positions on there, right? So what is, just give me an example.
So that's the air quality monitoring that we're now doing in our schools. And then I'd also point out that all of these categories include, as it says at the bottom, their salary benefits, but then there's other things like supplies in there. So if you just divide, the dollars by the FTEs, that's not an average salary. It's inclusive of more than just salary.
Okay. And then at slide 10, the last one that you had with the little small letters, the college tracks, am I understanding that it went down, our funding for it, or that we just keeping it as it was? I'm trying to understand.
Shoot, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find that one.
Oh, it was very small. It's, I'm sorry, I wish I could.
Programs.
Okay, or is it that you haven't spent
Number
it all yet?
6, number 6
yeah.
on the chart.
It's diversion programs and college track.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be another one that's eligible to bring back into the operating budget, still to be discussed.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's what I have.
Mr. Said.
I have a quick question about a couple things I saw here. So on slide 10, that really big chart up here for the second one where it says building supplies maintenance and then water bottle, what does that mean? Just wanted some clarification there.
Those are the water bottle fillers.
Fillers, like the water fountain fillers. Okay, thank you for that. And then one more thing. I see safety and security on here, and it puts there's like $1 million for that in our FY2024. I just wanted to know what specifically, what it says, safety and security, what things those are? As I saw security cameras prior, but are there additional supports that are going to be put in?
So those are mostly one-time purchases like the cameras. And then I don't know if there's.
It's the labor to install the cameras, the contractor service.
Okay, so it's the cameras and then the contract to get them installed at this different.
So it's pretty much just the cameras then?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Ms. Evans?
Yes, first, thank you. We always appreciate getting this information and, of course, being transparent. So just help me with this. So on page 4, slide 8, did we put it in order? So page 4, slide 8 is like our almost must-haves. And then the second one on page 5, slide 9, we pulled out a few things. Slide 10 that are like the things that we absolutely want to.
Yeah, correct. The way we kind of put it in order was by FTEs. So,
Okay.
What you're reading on page 8, those are the big FTEs that were moved, and then same thing with page 9. Those are actually all the FTEs that were in ESSER prior.
Okay. Because I did see where we definitely want to make sure that we're providing support to our schools, whether we have the ASAs. We've been trying to move that over for a long time. So, okay, I was just trying to look in, because I was looking at slide 10. Like, of course, everything on here we want, right? But I guess if we have to pull off things, I was just trying to make sure that,
And it's hard to read as it is, but the slide, if you're trying to tie the exact dollars, some of slide 10 already had dollars in ESSER. So when we moved some of that, so the 29 million is part of that 123, but not dollar for dollar because there was already items in there.
okay,
So we're just adding back to what was already in ESSER.
okay. All right. Thank you.
And apologies again for the small font there, but.
So as we are thinking of our next budget, there's maintenance of effort, plus slide 7, 160 million projected. I feel like the little cash register sign should go on, cha-ching. Then 29 million plus of things that we had to put in ESSER that we'll have to decide whether to put back into the base budget or not. We're at 190 million.
No, I'm sorry. Those are already included in the 160. There should be a line there that says ESSER.
The 40 million.
Yep, the 40 million is the.
That 40 is the combination of the next two pages, the 29 and then the 9.1.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
What it does not include is any additional accelerators beyond ESSER and Blueprint, and there will be some that are just, absolutely necessary to move forward.
So we're talking about 160 million above maintenance of effort.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, before accelerators and before reductions.
That actually, this doesn't include the state funding as well, too. So this is our total increase. So we'll know our state funding on January 15th. So that theoretically could be subtracted from that.
Okay. Mrs. Evans?
Yes, so our next few board meetings prior to us deciding on the operating budget will be really important as we're looking at progress monitoring and everything and seeing what we put in the budget last cycle that is helping to support our students to move forward in the area of literacy and math. If those programs are working, then those are the things that we want to look at to ensure that we continue to do since it's so tight. I'm just thinking out loud, right? Because this is a tough year and we've heard that. And there's so much that we moved from the operating budget to ESSER. And that was in an effort to ensure that we could do what we needed to do, right, based on the funding that we were going to be provided. So I would really ask staff as they're coming and presenting to really, really hone in on what we're doing that's working to help increase or move our students forward, right? So we know that it'll take more than a couple of years for us to really see the movement. But as like just last week, we had a presentation where we were talking about the movement that we're seeing for our students. Like we saw some increases, right? Nothing to really, really celebrate because the numbers were dismal, right? But if we see that it's steady helping us to make an incline, we just really want to be able to consider that as we're thinking about this year's budget. So just wanted to highlight and say that. So tough decisions that we'll have to make going forward, but we hope that when everybody comes forward to present their chapters, that they're really sharing with us how their offices are being impacted so that we can ensure that everybody has the supports that they need in the way that we can help them to do this work. It's a heavy lift for sure. Thank you.
Mrs. Wolf?
Yeah, I want to say this is very clear. I really appreciate that this year. But I do want to just piggyback on what Ms. Evans said. I was trying to recall whether our evaluations are going to line up in time for us to be able to tell whether or not some of these things are working so that we can determine whether or not we want to continue funding. And if they don't, I think it's very important for people to know that when they come forward to present, because that was the biggest factor for me, to make sure that we continue funding things that really work. Thank you.
And I can ask Dr. Addison to come to the table and speak in a little bit more detail about the evaluations. But it is important to note, and I appreciate you raising that the stuff that was added in this big increase in FY24 is just now being implemented, right? I mean, it just started 2 months ago, and so there won't be, conclusive evaluation information on that in time for this budget, but I'll let Dr. Addison speak to that.
Good morning, everyone. One of the things I think also that will be beneficial in addition to what Mr. Hull shared is that we do have a number of programs that are continuing right in this school year. So we have some of those that ended in 22-23, and those evaluation reports will be coming to you soon. So that will give you some of the information that you can use in your decision making around that. Additionally, intentionally, what we plan to do to try to help support for some of the programs where we're available is to create kind of like a mid-year check. So winter time is when we're trying to give you some preliminary information for some of these programs. And so both of those should hopefully help in your decision making as it relates to budget.
And I think the progress monitoring reports that we're trying to bring in every month will help us see that. But I think it's important that people give us the statistics so that we can start to see improvement. I mean, I know that you can't get any real evaluation data less than 3 to 5 years. So thanks.
I just wanted to add, I want to piggybacking off of Ms. Wolf, it would be really important if we can have you at the table, Dr. Addison, when we're going through the progress monitoring, because you deal in the data. And so it will be helpful to have us dive a little bit deeper. And so if you know what they're going to be presenting coming up, and you can come forward and share some information with us, that would be helpful. I know that quite a few of my colleagues last meeting were, Ms. Rivera-Oven had mentioned the EML learners, and then Ms. Hewlett came up to talk about some that were doing really well, but with the numbers that we saw, we couldn't see that. So if you could come up to be able to present and share that kind of information, and then to some degree, when we see the data, we're put on defense. So I was in agreement with Ms. Wolf about how the numbers look, but if there's some way that we can kind of parse out the information for us to see if our Black and African kids are not on free and reduced price meals, how they're doing, right? Just take a deeper dive into the data like that within some of our subgroups, that would just be helpful.
Sure, no problem. And then
Your light's not on.
You can turn it.
Oh, sorry. No problem. And just to preview, you'll be seeing me again shortly next week to share evidence of learning update for the board. So don't worry.
All right.
Hey, Dr. Addison, I just want to remind you that, not you, whoever does this, that I'd like to get a breakdown for each school when you submit data. Thanks.
Dr. Addison, yes. So it was presented to us that 10 programs will be put on evaluation this year. I want to ask specifically which ones it's a continuation. We might have multi-years, and which ones we are just starting, right? So if I read from the top, we have enrich literature curriculum and benchmark advanced enrichment. Is that
That's new.
That's new. Okay. Erica math curriculum.
New.
Okay. Structural literacy.
That's a continuing.
Okay. Summer school.
Continuing.
Tutoring.
Continuing.
And then we have central program identification.
That's new.
That's new, but
So it is new in the sense of our evaluation of our processes as it relates to the 3 bulleted items there. So while we've been implementing our central program identification process, we have not yet evaluated those processes.
okay. Mathematic coaches.
That's new.
Two-way immersion.
So it's new for us, but the Center for Applied Linguistics did their evaluation, and they had an aspect embedded that talked about two-way immersion programs. We're kind of building off of that.
Okay. Then academic opportunity specialist.
That's new.
Okay. And restorative justice specialist.
So that is it's new, but it's a holdover from last school year because we had to put that one on hold.
Okay. And what I don't see here that might be important in our understanding is our virtual academy.
Yes.
I think that was supposed to be, like, it was on the rotation of evaluation. Will we be able to see that?
So we do have an evaluation of the 21-22 school year that's been kind of delayed that we will be sharing with you soon. That's coming. It is not on the list, but we can look into, for example, an outcome evaluation to build on what that original evaluation was, which was also implementation.
I will appreciate that.
Wolf?
You might have, I think you've covered some of this before, but you just said that the math coaches would be new, but there were some math coaches in the schools and have been in there for some time. Don't we have data on the success or lack of success of those math coaches?
So we could build that in terms of our evaluation process, and from the lens with which the information you're seeking to support budget, we can provide an update in terms of what have we seen to date. I would have to defer to Dr. Pugh and or her team in terms of what might look different as it relates to the math coaches who were in place before versus those who have been brought on now.
Sure, I can understand that. You can distinguish between the two, but
Yes.
when you said that there was, that they were new, that's what
Yes, I apologize. I was speaking from the lens of the evaluation being new.
Thank you.
Mrs. Modrowski, any questions?
No, not really. I just would echo the comments of, my colleagues. And I am also going to be interested in getting information about how we are going to be providing equity in our schools through the funding of I guess they're called the independent funds, so that they can have, I would like to see better equity in terms of abilities to provide field trips and additional supports that the schools generally are required to pay for themselves.
Thank you.
That raises a question in my mind. We were doing differential type funding based on need. Can we do any evaluation of that to see whether or not that really helps and supports the kids?
So we do intend for this upcoming school year to include an aspect of the descriptive financial aspect of the programming. What you're describing sounds to be similar to like return on investment or cost benefit analysis. It gets a little challenging in education, to be honest, and what you will find in the literature, because we looked it up, is really they recommend that we engage in a program evaluation process to do it in education.
I think that's important for our public to know, that it's not, this is not apples and oranges to sort of corporate America. So I think that's a good point. Thank you.
Dr. Addison, so just so that I'm understanding what you're saying, the literature says that instead of doing a cost-benefit analysis in education, you should focus on program evaluation?
So it doesn't say instead of. What we explored a few years ago, and probably wasn't maybe about a year and a half ago, we looked at return on investment as it relates to education. And talking with our consultants and looking at the literature, one of the processes that they recommend to engage in is program evaluation, to speak about the return on investment of funding for a program. And I think once we get to that point in the district in terms of program budget, that might help us more in that regard. But right now, when we have these larger buckets, a program evaluation process is the best practice, I would say, as it relates to being able to say the return on investment or the impact of what we're putting forward as it relates to student achievement and outcomes.
Okay, so specifically, if we gave a school a math coach, because you are studying the math coach's effectiveness, you're in a sense getting data on effectiveness.
Yes.
Of that specific, but you have to be specific. There's a lot of resources going into schools. You don't know which variable is making a difference.
And that's what makes it challenging from the lens of program evaluation. We can't just, one of the things to keep in mind is it is difficult to do a control experimental setting in schools, because we will not intentionally not provide a service to students when we know they need it. So we have to engage in a process of students who are accessing the program versus those who aren't accessing, or they might not be receiving those services, and look at the differences in that regard.
We're carrying a number of programs that serve few students, and they're very expensive. Are we going to be able to get an evaluation of some of those? And I'm thinking of some of the career programs, because, the world is moving into a different orbit, let's say. So the career needs are changing. So are we evaluating what we do offer to see, one, if it's still relevant, two, if students are actually signing up, and if there is, a need to think about something else?
I would say that we, and I'll go back to what you shared in terms of the progress monitoring aspect, right? So there's the formal program evaluations that we've provided that we will do for this school year, and then there's an opportunity for us to engage and work with those program managers on the progress monitoring aspect to share that level of information that could be helpful.
Ms. Rivera-Eben?
Thank you. So a couple of things. The return investment evaluation that we did a few years ago, you said we did one?
We looked at the literature around.
Okay. So we actually didn't do it. We just read about it. Okay.
We explored how we might be.
Okay, got it. Okay, I thought we did it. I was like, I wanted to know what happened. Okay, got it. So piggybacking what Ms. Wolf said and others about looking at some of these costly programs that we have, the importance of just seeing the impact that it has. But I guess for me, it's also, as a person who ran a program, which was a preventive intervention program, you really don't see results, down the line for a couple of years, right? And we live in a society where we want instant, spontaneous results when it comes to things. So I guess my thing would be to kind of be cautious also, to kind of look at the whole thing. But if we see and have any inclination that something is starting to work, some of these new programs, if we see a trend of our kids getting better in math, but then also look at, could we do better with that? Because if we have one math coach for 4 or 5 schools, it might not be that is the math coach, it might be that they don't have enough time to be able to invest more time in each school. So, but even if we see an inclination of that working, maybe coming to the table and saying, we could probably do better if we had a math coach that only had 2 schools. So I just want us to be able, and that's your area, that's not, but I just, for me to understand a little better the long-term effect that it's going to have and whether that is a worthwhile investment. I don't want us to be here 10 years down the road and not having the results, to see. But again, I am conscious that sometimes it takes time for us to see improvement, especially in education.
Yes, and I would add that part of our process hopefully will help with that. So in our evaluation reports, we have our recommendations, and then think back to the stoplight chart that I shared, right? So we talk about the time that it takes to see outcomes or impact. So those factors coupled together will also help. We do intentionally put what I'll say is a disclaimer around the time that it takes to see outcomes, especially if it's a brand new program being implemented.
Dr. Edison, I see that math coaches is on the evaluation, but prior to this year, we put in reading specialist. Has that ever been evaluated?
Yes, it has been evaluated.
Okay.
It's completed and in the queue to come to you all as
Okay.
members of the board. What I would share, if you think back to our new process in terms of ensuring that we have a responsive action from the program manager, that's what we're working on. So we will have that attached to what you receive, but that is coming soon.
And another significant staffing investment we have made is the staff development teacher.
Yes, on its way as well.
Okay, wonderful. Then I look forward to receiving those.
These come to us in the weekly transmittal when they do come to us, correct?
Yes.
Look for those there. We do have one final slide, and so I'll hold my questions till the very end.
Next slide. So this kind of it's part of the discussion we were just having. So I just want to give you an update on where we are at with the program budget. So this, we've had multiple meetings, and the first step in determining this is what programs do we want and what categories. So to give you an idea, we're going to have 5 different categories. One's going to be core instructional programs. This is where we're going to have elementary school core instruction. Now I say that because that's a pretty broad category, right? So some of the things that we've been talking about might fall under subcategories within these programs. So picture, we're going to have a data page that's going to show basically the same way we lay it out now by our objects. We're going to have salaries. We're going to have, the different components within a budget. But then on the left side, we're going to have a narrative of what's included in there. Because what everybody's kind of in the process of doing now is taking the superintendent's budget and then looking at what they do for the program budget. So to explain it a little better, like I might be involved in 4 separate programs, and that's one of the limitations of our system is you can kind of split yourself into 4 different programs by 25% here, here, and here. But what you're going to get out of that is you're going to get a better picture of what we're spending for programs. But the programs that we were talking about, they'll be kind of sub-programs within a program. Still, it'll offer us a better way to evaluate rather than the way we're doing it now in chapters. But it might not, so in other words, we have 75 total programs within these categories. First one's core instructional. Next ones are programs that provide additional supports. So about half of the programs within that category are our special education services. But also in there, you're going to see our blueprint. So you're going to see early childhood, you're going to see college and career readiness. So these will be a good way where we can kind of, if you want to know, hey, how much are we spending in college and career readiness, we can have that at a glance. So that's going to be a good tool going forward. The next category is programs to support school improvement, and that's going to be some of the big ticket items in there is going to be instructional technology as well as professional development. We're going to have school operations support programs. That's where we're going to have transportation, building services, safety and security, and other support services. These might somewhat mirror the current departments and divisions that we have right now. And then finally, system-wide support programs. That's where you're going to see operational leadership. Finance will be in this area as well as communications. So I just wanted to give you a preview of that. The next item we have there, and these are all budget enhancements, either new things that we're doing or things that we haven't done in a while, such as the program budget. We're going to be doing, in the next 2 months, multiple community forums during the months of October and November. We're going to be, and this is another one we haven't done in 10 years, but we've just completed our Montgomery County Economic Impact Study. So what that is, what we try to do is we try to relate. We have a $3.2 billion budget, right? And we know we're a big component within the economy of Montgomery County, but it'll have some highlights of what we can kind of show. So, as you may or may not know, we are the second largest employer in the county, second to federal government. Not only do we have our staff of around $25,000 employees. I wish it was $25,000. But those our annual support outlays also cover 30,000 or 37,000 jobs in Montgomery County. In other words, every dollar that we put in, for contractors and stuff like that, support other employment within the county. And then if you exclude payroll, for every dollar that we spend, it generates $1.45 in Montgomery County activity. So just another tool and another way to make our budget transparent and show the effect that it has on the county. One of the other things we're doing, or is enhancement, is our Budget 101 website. This one, we didn't really promote it last year because we really haven't updated it since pre-COVID. But on that Budget 101 website, you're going to find a few great videos that kind of in a video format explains what me and Mr. Hull just explained today, how our budget's developed, as well as how our resources are allocated. So we went in depth at Fiscal Management Committee on the different ways that we allocate resources. But this is it'll be an easy 5-minute video, and we're all going to share them at the community forums as well too. But that's going to reside on the finance website, as well as the new budget dashboard. You've heard about the academic dashboard. So strategic initiatives is working with us to create a budget dashboard as well too. This is where we're getting input from some of our stakeholders on how we want to display that information. So we figured that one of the things we want to do is display it by program, since that is kind of a new way we're doing that. But there'll be other things that we can put on the dashboard, so it's just a click away. You can actually hover over certain items to get more detail, again, in the name of transparency. And then finally, something that we'll be piloting is the student-based budgeting pilot. Ms. Wolf, you were talking about the needs of the students and how the dollars follow that. So in essence, we're going to be piloting that to see how that works, and we'll be evaluating that as well too when the time comes. So that's just some new budget enhancements.
Is the student-based budgeting pilot, was that a state requirement, if I recall?
Not a state, well, that's a good point. So the state requirement, how it's related, is our blueprint funding. So we do, because of our blueprint reporting, we actually have to make sure that the dollars follow the students. So that's one thing. But this actually was recommended through the anti-racist audit, in the action plan there. Both that as well as the program budget too were suggestions to make our budget more equitable.
What's the time frame for the program budget?
folks are working on that now, doing that, going through the exercise of what I was saying, like, how is your time split between different programs? But one of the things that we really can't complete it till after the superintendent's budget is done, because the total at the bottom line is going to tie to the superintendent's budget. So we're going to need a little time in there after superintendent's is put out, but it'll be shortly after that.
Are you presenting that publicly, or what's your rollout plan?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we should discuss it here, because then we can give the details, at one of the board meetings subsequent to the superintendent's budget.
And the time frame for the updated website?
That's actually in process right now. I can't say that it's totally updated yet. We're in the process of that, but it should be before the budget work session, so we can kind of direct people to that. The budget dashboard actually is until the end of FY24, but the Budget 101 website with the updated video and other information related to our other funds as well, too. It's going to be a wealth of information there. That'll be available during the work sessions.
And the pilot has begun already?
No, we're in the early stages. The first step is determining what cluster that we're going to be piloting.
And this, I think you said, has been vetted through the Budget Advisory Committee, all of these?
The Budget 101 website, we just introduced that to the Budget Advisory last night, and our next meeting, we're going to get input from them. Budget Advisory, was not part of the program budget. That's kind of an internal.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you're putting out a lot of resources and tools for the public. I just want to make sure that we're checking in with different stakeholders to make sure that we're actually producing things that are useful to them. Just going back to the first part of the presentation, just so that I'm understanding. So we talked a lot about the math coaches that were added in the last year's budget. Where are they in your charts, or they are now part of the base budget, so we're not seeing them as need to be moved back into the base budget? They're just base budget now.
Correct. They would be included in all of the numbers that we shared as part of the base budget.
And so in slide number 3, which has the breakdown of instructional salaries, special ed, fixed charges, where would the math coaches fit in?
We may need
Instructional salaries?
I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm going to ask our budget director, Ms. Alfonso Windsor, to come up and speak to that.
Again, this is just so that my interest is in just really understanding how, when we add things, right, people say, okay, so you're adding, your base budget grows. Where is it, so that people understand with this particular example?
And I'll let Yvonne speak to that, but I do want to just also point out that part of the budget process that we've always done and will continue to do this year is look at realignments within departments. And so we've not really been very we haven't really shared that out publicly, and we will be sharing that this year. But really, it's looking at what different departments need to do to realign their resources so that they're meeting this year's strategic priorities, not the priorities from several years ago. So I've heard other people say that, but I just wanted to note that it's not like it goes in there and disappears. It might get realigned to something, to align with the strategic plan currently. But I'll let Yvonne speak a little bit more.
Thank you. Good morning. So when we broke out the budget, between schools and district provided services, we have to be very careful, and we try to put anything that is in schools as something that the principals are really supervising, that it's administered at the school level. So the coaches, because they are sent out to the schools, they are falling under the academic other instructional supports that are on the second slide under the district provided services, because they are supervised at central office and then sent to the schools to provide those additional supports.
Okay. Okay. So, but in slide 3, they would be under instructional salaries.
Under page 6.
Slide 3.
I'm sorry, under the pie chart. It would be under the 20%. The district provided services.
Oh, I don't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Under the slide number 3, under operating budget by state category, those would be under instructional salaries, correct?
Wait. It would be where?
Instructional salaries.
Instructional salaries, 39%.
Correct,
Okay.
sorry. I thought you were looking at the other two slides on the breakdown.
And then in slide 5, you said it's under other direct services to students.
No.
Actually, no, they're on slide 6, district provider services breakdown is under academic other instructional supports. It's on the second, the biggest piece of the second chart, the 416 FTEs and the $72.4 million.
Okay. I still think that, I think it would still be helpful for people to understand how the schools are funded. I mean, this pie chart is kind of a high level, but then we do have we have Title I schools and how they're funded, focus schools and other schools, and just helping people understand. If you have 100 students, you're going to get X number of staff, and you know, if it's a focus school or a Title I school, then you get this additional support. Maybe that's in the videos that you're going to put on the website, but I think that's a critical step in presentations such as this to go a little deeper into what's conveyed in the pie chart.
And so the video does touch on it a little bit, but maybe what we could do is just some examples. You know, school A has this many students and is funded in this way. School B has this many students and funded in this way. But I appreciate that feedback because I wanted to mention also we are going to be taking this presentation, the same presentation, to the Ed and Culture Committee this Thursday and sharing it with them as well. So the feedback is helpful as far as just trying to make sure we're hitting the mark.
Mr. Said.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question here. Oh, yes. If we go all the way back to, I think it was the very last slide, slide 11, I wanted to kind of ask more about number 6 there, student-based budgeting pilot. I'm not familiar with that. Maybe if you could explain it a little bit, just so I have that information for any students who kind of want to know what that means.
Yep, and we will do a more in-depth presentation as we work through the pilot, but we're working with Education Resource Strategies out of Boston to build this, and really what it is it looks at funding on a per-student basis, and so it looks at the different needs of the students, whether it's special education, emergent multilingual, and we haven't determined exactly which categories we're looking at. Students living in poverty, experiencing poverty is another one where they would just earn additional dollars on top of that. So a student who is learning English, as their second language, they need a little bit more support than someone who obviously is that's their first or only language. So they would earn a few additional dollars. And then the school's allocation is just an aggregate or a sum of each of the individual students within that. And so schools with higher needs will get more dollars. And it's a much easier way. One of the benefits of it is transparency. It's just an easier way of showing what you were asking for, Ms. Silvestre, as far as how are the schools funded, and because this way you're looking at it by student, and it's very simple. You get this much if you're emergent multilingual, you get this much if you're special ed, this much if you're experiencing poverty, et cetera. So it just provides additional transparency in addition to additional equity.
Okay, someone could turn their mic off. Turn it back on. Sorry. There we go. So basically kind of what this does is ensures equitable funding for all students. So if a student has more need, they're going to get more funding. So I'm also wondering, since you're allocating the funding based on school, right, because that's the only way you can do it, let's say if a school has less additional funding from outside sources towards like athletic equipment or something like that, will that also be taken into account? So it's not just students, but it's the resources the schools have for the students as well?
Yes, and so, one of the reasons that we didn't bring this with a bigger presentation today is because we're still working through. Not all of the resources that go to a school will be included in there. Some of them will, so we're still working through what that will look like. Principals will have some flexibility, but not unlimited, so there are still going to be requirements. You have to have a media specialist. You have to, have a certain class size and all of those things. And so because we're still in the early stages, we're still making all of those determinations.
Yeah, that's fantastic. This is really, really good. I'm really happy to hear that, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And just an initial comment, I really do appreciate the very pragmatic, grounded approach that we're taking to the budget work this year. we had a lot of criticism during FY24 from funders. And in my mind, that criticism was often very nonspecific and therefore not particularly constructive. In just saying, oh, you're not transparent enough, we don't know where the money's going. So I think all of this, especially all the information that's reflected on slide 11, just goes to the fact that we heard that, and we can do things differently. We can be additive to the conversation. We can provide that narrative component. We can break things down in multiple different ways. So however you come to this information, however you come to the budget conversation, you can see what you individually are looking to see. And I did just want to contextualize that by saying, I was talking to one of our state delegates recently who is looking at potential legislation in this year's in the 25 General Assembly, 24, excuse me, in the 2024 General Assembly, about that would have an impact on how school systems present their budgets. And they had staff take a look at all 24 LEAs to see what and how they presented information to the public about their budget. And to those who criticize the work that we do and the information we supply and how we communicate with our stakeholders, she said more than half the LEAs provide nothing. They could find nothing on those LEAs' websites and public documents about their budgets, how they created them, the impact and consultation process that went into that. So for those who say MCPS doesn't really do it, I would just say, please take a look at other systems, because you only know your own experience. And so, but I do think including the economic impact study is brilliant when it comes to people in the county who say, why should I care about schools?
Yes.
Why should I spend so much of my tax dollars on schools? Because as all of us know, the impact of a powerful public school system is vast and diverse and is the main economic driver in any community. So whoever you are in this county, school kids or not, you customer of the school system or not, you benefit from a strong public school system. So I think that's brilliant. And I want to echo Ms. Silvestri's comments. I do appreciate the dashboards and the new dashboards and the updated budget dashboards. But I feel like a little bit of a broken record on two things. Please make sure your end users are beta testing these before you make them live, so that your customers are saying, yep, got it, this is good, we can find what we need. And then if people can't find it, so we do just have to make the information on our website easier for people to find. So just those two comments. And I did have, so going back, so we know our base per pupil budget grant from the state for FY25 will be based on our confirmed enrollment as of September 30th. I know they're still scrubbing those numbers, but does anybody here know what number we reported to the state on September 30th?
So I don't believe we've reported that yet because they're still scrubbing the numbers. So it's not due on September 30th. It is as of September 30th.
Okay, got it. And because I do just want to remind folks that last year, after those numbers were finalized, our enrollment is very fluid. We added over 3,000 students, AKA a very large high school, after those numbers were finalized. So I do appreciate you making very clear, Mr. Riley, that we don't budget based on what we know we're going to get. We budget based on what we think we're going to need. And those two things aren't going to line up because of the enrollment trends of this county. And so being very clear and upfront about that with particularly our funders, I think is very, very important. And then contextualizing that with our reality. This is how many students that we don't have a per pupil grant for this year that we are serving based on the enrollment that happened after those numbers were finalized for last year. I want to echo what Ms. Rivera-Oven was saying on the effectiveness work we're doing, which I so appreciate, because I think you're right. Looking at program evaluations to determine what works and what doesn't that's the way forward on making sure that we are doing our due diligence to spend the taxpayers' money wisely and well. But it's really important. I mean, it can be very hard for some of our really important programs to demonstrate effectiveness when the effectiveness is silence. You know, when you're effectively preventing something, you're not seeing anything. And so you're looking at tangential related. So when we're looking at how well our positive youth development work and our partnership with Street Outreach Network is working, we're not seeing the big conflicts arising in schools. So that's how do you prove a negative? But those programs are very, very important. And so I appreciate us keeping that in mind when we are going through some of our effectiveness work and our program evaluation work, that for some of our really important work, it's in the negative that we're seeing that it's actually working. And then the last question, I did have a question around when we're looking on, for instance, slide 5, and we're looking at the components and food services. So when we look at our food services budget, that's just people, correct? Because the food piece of food services, that's an enterprise fund. Mm-hmm. No, okay.
So it looks at the entire food services. So the entire food services, employees, food, equipment, supplies, everything is in the enterprise fund. But they are part of our operating budget, part of the $3.2 billion. So when you're looking at the breakdown, the one at the schools part, it is the actually cafeteria workers and managers that sit at the school, plus the food that they sell at the school that is not prepared in the central facility. And then when you look at the non-school base, you're talking about the warehouse, the central production facility, and so on, part of food services.
Okay, complicated. Anyway, I just, again, thank you. I think this is some of the most interesting work that we do. I know others don't share that opinion, but yes, thank you very much, and looking forward, because we'll be talking about more of this stuff, coming attractions at the November Fiscal Management Committee meeting.
Ms. Yang.
Yes, hi. I have a number of things, but first of all, I want to associate myself with the comment made by Ms. Sylvester, acknowledged by Mr. Hall, that if we can demonstrate the different type of schools and our investment in the different type of schools, county council, county resident, and all of us are very interested in making sure that we provide the support as needed to our students. So we need to demonstrate that. Another thing is I have a communication request. We have scheduled several community dialogue coming up. The next one is October 19, right? And we also have scheduled board work session for budget. I would really appreciate 2 graphics. One to show us the community conversations, one to show us the upcoming board work session as soon as possible so we can communicate. Instead of doing it by piecemeal, okay, we have this one, only one. A few days ahead, I think we should let everyone know way ahead of time and have them have at a glance understanding of all the engagement that we are doing. Number 3, going for the Budget 101 website, Mr. Riley mentioned that you have presented it to your advisory group, and then they will confirm it next. When is the next meeting? And because right now it's showing 2022, right?
Yes, so the Budget 101, a little different than the budget dashboard. We're looking for feedback from the Budget Advisory Committee. I think it's the 27th. It's like 10 days.
So you will be hopefully very soon after the 22nd, because as we are having community conversations, I would like that to be an accessible tool for the public to use, to better engage in our conversation.
And for the other item you mentioned, so like a calendar, right, of upcoming budget forums and work sessions.
Okay. Then I have another questions about our support and the way we're doing budget. So is this an opportunity for us really to look at our staffing, right? Because part of the transparency piece is people, all of us, need to understand how this budget is built. But when we look at it, though, we as a county, I think, layer the most support in our state. It has been said that we have the most layered support for our students. Some of the supports are provided directly by MCPS. Other supports are in partnership with other agencies, such as Department of Human and DHHS. So is this an opportunity for us to see, we have a community school, we have linkages for learning. How are we deployed employees to these programs, and what are their roles? Are they overlapping? Or are they, if they're overlapping, are there any other area we're not covering, right? Because we have a lot of schools with different needs. So I would say that when the time to do budget, it's a good time for us to do some of that staff auditing so that we understand so we are not so much in silos. We are working in connections with other organizations and agencies, that how we are staffing our people, or how we can really make our resources get the best buck for our result for our buck. I would like us to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. We were talking about that as well too. So when we do come to do the work sessions by chapter, any of those areas where there are other partners helping us, we'll make sure that that's made transparent during those work sessions.
And one thing that we've started doing this year is monthly meetings with DHHS. So that's not something the district has done in the past, but for the very reasons that you're bringing up, that's something that Mr. Riley and the team have started doing on a monthly basis. So we're looking at exactly that.
Yeah. Mr. Vera-Alvin?
Just very quickly to pick up on a couple of things, because I think the most common questions that we get in the community from folks, especially those that don't have kids in the school, is we spend so much money in schools. Oh my gosh, we spend over half our budget goes to schools, right? How much is it per pupil and so on? And I just don't think the regular folk out there has a reality of an idea of what it is that we do and how complex it is. So like when you talk about EML learners, don't we get a differential amount from the state, a little bit more, in order to invest more? And I think all those things need to be delineated, because one of the things that I wanted to happen is those kids are making our system worse, right? And I hear that a lot too. And going back to my colleague, Mrs. Harris, comment, we are the economic engine of the state. So for me, what you're doing, making sure people understand that, and the investment that is not so much, but the investment that the consequences that it has in our economy and our long-term economy when we do things right at the school level. So thank you for that. And I'm learning a lot about in-kind contributions when it comes to I'm doing my first audit for the nonprofit I run, and so I'm just wondering, going on what Mrs. Yang was saying, there's a lot of stuff that other folks do for us that are kind of in-kind, and whether we take that into account when we are looking at a farm school or a school that is getting all these other services, or are they contracted? Are we contracting with HHS? Are we going in half and half in some of these programs? Or are these programs like the nurses, I think, is another one. People think that they work for the school system, but they work for HHS, right? So I think it's important to have all that delineated and for us to understand what are some of those in-kind contributions. And also when we're making decisions, that we have some schools that when we look at them and and they're not farms, that there are some reasons for that. Like I know in my district, Fox Chapel, I was very shocked it wasn't a farm school, and it's because we have a program there from kids that come out of that that neighborhood for a gifted program. And so on. So why is it, people are like, why is it it's not a farm school, but the other services that maybe linkages brings and so on. So for me, it's kind of that people, it's visual. a lot of it is visual, and we just want to see exactly how that delineates and the investment that we're putting in, but also the partnerships that the school system has, in order to be able to do the work that we do every day.
One thing that occurred to me, Mr. Hull, which was very helpful last budget cycle, was your slide where you talked about the per pupil cost adjusted for inflation. Because people say, okay, this is the biggest historic budgets. Year after year, your budget grows. But actually, the per pupil cost is not necessarily bigger than ever when adjusted for inflation. So I think we need to keep reminding the public that. And in addition, as has been mentioned, more of our students require additional services for special education and English language. Just to keep people with their feet on the ground in terms of the reality of where the money is going. It is a huge budget, but we do have more students with services, and when you adjust for inflation, it's not probably as big of an increase as they think.
Yeah, and I would thank you for that. I think a perfect example of that is this current year budget. So as we saw on the first slide, it was an 8% increase, which is great. Well, inflation was running at nearly 8% last year. Our contracts increased by 6% plus a step, which is equivalent to 3%. So that's a 9% increase in, which is by far our biggest cost. And so that's an excellent point, and we can certainly bring that slide back. I would also just note that while Montgomery County Public Schools is a well-funded school system, it is not like we are head and shoulders above other counties in the state, and that was something else we looked at last year. I mean, we're behind Baltimore City, far behind Washington, D.C., kind of on par with Frederick, Howard, and some of the others, maybe slightly above, but not a game-changing amount.
And finally, in your slide 7, when you have the $160 million projection, and you said you're still waiting to hear from the state in January, would it be helpful to put in there what you expect to get from the state, or do you hesitate to do that just to give people a more realistic number?
Yeah, we were debating that. I think we were concentrating on the expense side here. And then when we have better information, we'll come back with the revenue and speak to some of the other topics that we were talking about here, just all at once.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. As has been stated, we have a budget forum this Thursday, and it's virtual. So come one, come all. You can dig deeper into what you've heard today, or see some of the videos that will be presented there. And we will publicize the other budget forums that are coming up in the community. Thank you. I think this has been a great introduction for us to get our minds working in terms of the work that is before the board in the coming months. So thank you, everyone. No further questions, and we are adjourned.